The box was red. 3 years of soft blue chimes, 3 years of a system that teased me and blessed my weddings and dimmed itself politely while I slept. And on the worst morning of my second life, it hung in the frost-bright air above a broken safe-house door and burned red as a wound. A contract has been broken. My name is Ricard. I sign contracts that cannot fail. Fate itself enforces my ink. And the woman I had promised to protect, personally, in writing, was gone into the West in the hands of soldiers whose king wanted her erased. I want to be honest about the next hour because this account is worthless if I lie in it. I raged. At the lane, at the drugged guards, at the boot print, and then, for the first time ever, at the box itself. I stood in that frozen lane and demanded to know what the point of any of it was. The ink, the chimes, the ledger of karma, if the one clause that mattered could snap like everything else in this world. And Seraphy, who has never once raised her voice at me, waited until I was finished. "The contract is not broken the way you mean it, my lord," she said, and there was something underneath the gentleness, something enormous and patient. "It is being fulfilled by a longer road. Ride. The road is already bending." Dane had the yard mounted before I reached it. My father was cinching a saddle with a face I recognized from old portraits of a war hero. Sam had 30 of his best at the gate with torches, and nobody had ordered any of it. Camel pressed a satchel into my hands, maps and coin, and because she is Camel, a signed blank requisition for anything the compact roads could provide. Kali took my face in both hands like a mother and said one word: "Fetch." We rode through the first night without stopping, and I learned what my body is for. Not fighting, carrying a lawyer fast. Dane set a pace that ate the dark, torches strung out behind us on the compact road like a burning thread, and somewhere past the second waypost I looked up at the hills and saw the beacons answering ahead of us. 1, then 3, then a horizon's worth, Wick's fires calling to Aldering's calling to Hertz's, the whole frontier waking up angry on our behalf. Sam drew level with me at a water stop, looked at my face, and said the kindest thing he owns: "We'll get her corpse. Dead men don't break promises." Then he was gone up the column shouting at someone because tenderness has a budget. At dawn we passed through a village I didn't know, deep in Wick's land, and they were waiting at their gate with bread and fresh horses and no questions, because a printed sheet had gone ahead of us on the night riders. An old woman pressed a hot loaf into my hands and gripped my wrist and said, "Bring the red-haired lady home, Lord. She has a kind face." I hadn't known Verena had ever ridden this road. I hadn't known she was anybody's red-haired lady but ours. You build a thing and it grows past your fences. That loaf got me 40 miles. The Snatch Squad had a night's start, fresh horses, and a professional's route to the border. What they did not have, and could not have known they did not have, was luck. Ours went with them like a plague. The bridge at Weir's Crossing, which had stood for 40 years, chose that morning to shed its center span into the flood. The remount station they'd paid in advance discovered every horse lame or colicked. A storm came down off the mountains a month early and closed the high road like a door. Dane read their turnings at each obstacle, and each turning bent them south, away from the border, along roads where our beacons were already burning. I watched the pattern build with my heart in my throat. The blessing was not gone. The blessing was hurting. The compact answered a beacon lit for one woman. I want that written plainly because it had never been tested. The pacts pledge mutual defense of the signatories' lands, and a lawyer could argue a kidnapped clerk of trade is no one's land at all. Nobody argued. Wick's riders closed the south fords the first night. Aldering's huntsmen, who know every deer path on the frontier, found the squad's cold camp by dawn. And Hertz, 60 years old and fat as prosperity, rode out himself with his household guard because, as he put it later, family is family, and he had danced with her at the wedding. Paper, holding hands, tighter than I'd ever dared hope. We ran them down at the old salt ford, 12 professional soldiers in unmarked harness caught between Sam's militia coming up the bank and Dane's riders coming down it, with a flooded river at their backs and Aldering's arrows feathered into the mud at their feet like a suggestion. Their captain was a practical man. He looked at the odds, looked at the water, and set Verena down as gently as a man returning borrowed porcelain. She was bound, gagged, 3 days from her last kindness, and when I got to her she fought me too for a heartbeat, until her eyes came back from wherever they'd been keeping her. And then Verena, daughter of a murdered duke, held onto my coat with both tied hands and shook like the river was in her bones. I am not a soldier. I have no sword arm at all. But I carried her up that bank myself, and no one offered to help, because something in my face declined in advance. The ride home was slower, and better. We made camp in Hertz's home valley the first night, and the old baron produced, from somewhere in his fat saddlebags, a bottle of Ashvale amber he'd been hoarding since the wedding, and pressed the first cup on Verena with the gruff ceremony of an uncle who has decided the matter of whether your family is closed. She held the cup and looked around the fire, at Dane cleaning his blade, at Sam retelling the ford with his hands, at Aldering's huntsmen and Wick's riders and a fat baron in the firelight, all of it assembled for her, and she didn't say anything, and everyone let her not say anything, and that was the conversation. She slept that night in the middle of the camp, guarded by 4 houses' banners. I sat up and watched the fire, and did the arithmetic of what it had cost Malric to teach us we could do this. The captain talked. Professionals do once the arithmetic is settled. Loyalty is a wage like any other, and his employer was 3 kingdoms of bad roads away. What he confirmed froze us colder than the ford. This had not been bandits with a buyer, nor even spies on a hunch. The order came under seal from Vera's crown. Malric knew her name, knew her face, knew the city that sheltered her. The squad was meant to deliver her alive to the border garrison at Karst, where, the captain said, without any particular feeling, arrangements had been made. I asked what happened when she failed to arrive. He shrugged with his hands tied. Then the king stops being quiet about it. We rode home through the compact's lands, and I watched Verena watch the beacons still burning on the hills, one after another, all of it for her. At Ashvale's gate, half the city was waiting in the cold, and when the crowd saw her upright on the horse they cheered, and she flinched from it, and then, slowly, visibly, decided not to flinch and sat straighter than any of us and let her city look at her. That night Seraph's box glowed its old soft blue over my desk, and the contract with the false name on it lay flat under the light, unburned, unbroken, humming with patience. "The longer road, my lord," she said. I was starting dimly to be afraid of what that meant. I learned later what the city had done while we rode. Nothing dramatic. It had simply not gone to bed. The square held a quiet vigil around the well every night we were gone, Marin presiding, no speeches, just people standing with lamps because standing felt better than sleeping. Laurie cooked for the vigil, which is how Laurie prays. And someone, no one ever admitted who, kept a lamp burning in the window of Verena's room over the soapworks, all 3 nights, so that the first thing she saw riding home was her own window, lit, waiting. She stopped her horse in the gate and looked at it a long moment. City as contract. Every clause kept. The reckoning of how they found her took Camel 9 days, and it broke the gentlest heart in my house to do it. The trail was paper, so my wife hunted it like paper, who had seen the household rolls, who had copied the safe house provisioning, who wrote a fine gray clerk's hand that appeared, when you knew to look, in a captured Varen dispatch's marginal notes, transcribed verbatim from our own manifests. Odo. Toburn's Odo, our Odo, 2 years of keys and trust and lodging papers I had signed myself. Toburn aged 10 years in the telling of it. He offered me his own license, his warehouses, his hands for irons. I told him the only crime in his ledger was believing loyalty could be bought with fair wages, and that I had made the identical error, and we would settle both accounts at once. We settled it with paper because I am who I am. No arrest, no shouting. Instead, a final commission passed through Odo's desk, deliberately, temptingly priced. Copy the city's new defense schedules for his master's records, and to protect all parties, a receipt to sign formalizing his access. He signed. Of course he signed. Thoroughness is a virtue. The receipt, read correctly in front of the correct people, itemized every document category he had accessed in 2 years against the lodging oath he'd signed on arrival, and the confession assembled itself out of his own meticulousness, the way Premiers had, the way Jarrett's had, because the men who live by quiet records die by them too. He wept at my table, not for shame, I think, for the tidiness of it. Here is where I tell you what I did with him, because my line gets tested hardest when I am angriest, and I had never been angrier. Odo's leak had put Verena in ropes and Ashvale in a king's gun sights. The crowd outside my hall would have hanged him from the well-armed by acclamation. I gave him to the crown instead, under escort with his signed confession and a full accounting, to testify to a royal court about Veyran espionage on Corvin soil, sentenced to follow law, not fury. King Aldis's magistrates would find that testimony extremely interesting, and a testifying clerk is worth 100 hanged ones. Toburn asked me afterward quietly why. I told him the truth. The gallows is a door you cannot unopen. I only sign things I can enforce. Toburn and I walked his warehouses the week after Odo went east under escort, because a wound like that closes better walked on. He kept stopping at desks where the clerk's gray coat used to hang. I told him about a man I trusted in my first life who had been furniture to me too, right up until he wasn't, and that the lesson was never to stop trusting, only to start auditing, and that I happened to be married to the finest auditor alive. Camel designed the new vetting that month, cheerful and merciless, rotating desk assignments, paired copying, and a standing rule that any clerk may report any irregularity directly to her over anyone's head, including mine, with a posted bounty. The clerks call it the Odo rule. She calls it hygiene. Trust, but wash your hands. The ultimatum arrived in spring, carried by a Veyran herald in black and silver who rode through our gate with a face like a closed ledger. Parchment, ribboned and sealed. The kingdom of Vera demanded the surrender of the fugitive traitoress styling herself Verena, harborer of sedition against King Malric's lawful crown, within 60 days. Failing which, Vera would consider the margravate, the barony, the city, and every soul in it party to her treason. The herald read it aloud in the square because he'd been ordered to. The square listened in a silence I have never heard before or since. Then Marin, 70 years old, stepped out of the crowd, looked the herald up and down, and asked if Vera wanted an answer in writing or whether he could remember one sentence. The square roared. The herald left with one sentence. But a square's roar is not a council's answer, and I owe you the council. My father spoke as the soldier. 8,000 professionals, he said, was not Jarrett's tired 300, and walls do not eat, and courage is not a granary. Kali spoke as the court. Aldis could not openly commit the crown to war for one baron's guest, whatever his heart wanted, but a king's quiet is its own weapon, writs and grain and blind eyes. Camel laid out the war ledger without flinching, what we had, what we'd need, what starving looked like on paper. And Verena stood up at the foot of the table, white as the parchment that named her, and offered in a voice that only shook twice to end it by walking west. The room said no in 5 voices at once. My father said it loudest. But it was Laurie, flower still on her sleeve from the dinner she'd abandoned, who ended the debate. Your family, she said. We don't hand over family. Now sit down, you're making the room cold. So we chose to stand, and I did what I do with impossible odds. I put them in writing. That same night I drafted the muster call of the Frontier Compact, invoked in full for the first time, and a second document, longer, stranger, that Kali and I built together like a weapon. An open charter, addressed not to lords but to anyone, promising citizenship, wages, land right, and the protection of Ashvale's law to any soul who stood with the city through what was coming. We were going to need hands, and I have only ever known one way to gather them. Ding! 22 points. My birthday had passed in the middle of it all, marked by one cake Laurie refused to cancel, because sieges, she said, are no excuse for barbarism. The compact answered the muster the way it had answered the beacons, which is to say, personally. Wick arrived first with 900 and a face like a whetstone, walked our walls for 2 hours, and allowed that he'd seen worse. Aldering came with 600 and his grandfather's armor, which fit him the way history fits anyone, and which his sergeants had quietly reinforced with modern steel underneath, so the old man could wear his pride into the field without dying of it. Hertz brought 1,100, 400 wagons, and unforgivably his own cook, which caused the only genuine diplomatic incident of the war, until Lori annexed the man by teaching him her stew and calling it an alliance. 4 small banners on our walls beside the crown's writ. My father took command of the combined muster at Aldous' quiet request, and the day the old war hero's flag went up the tower, I watched 30 years come off him at once. The king's quiet help came in wagons with no crests, grain under sailcloth, crossbow staves in barrels marked as tool handles, a royal writ, unsealed and unsigned but in a hand everyone recognized, instructing Crown Roads to give Ashvale traffic priority for maintenance reasons, and 1 small chest, delivered by a rider who spoke to no one, containing the Crown's cipher for the frontier beacon towers and a note of 4 words. Hold. I am watching. Kings cannot always say what they mean. The good ones find wagons. Then Ashvale went to war the only way I know how, which is to say, it went to work. The shop's engineering tier emptied into the masons' yards. The concrete ramparts grew teeth, then outworks, then a second inner ring, Grum's apprentices pouring pale stone by torchlight in shifts that sang to keep time. The granaries went deep and doubled, sealed against fire, tallied on the well boards so every citizen could count the city's stomach for themselves. Pell drove the harvest in from every compact field, and the countryside came in with it, village by village, wagon by wagon, because our evacuation religion had a decade of drills behind it, and Marin's whistle had jurisdiction in 3 baronies now. 60,000 souls behind the walls by midsummer. Tier 5 had chimed months before. I barely noticed the catalog. I was shopping for a city's life. The shop, I should record, offered me the other road that summer. A new page unfurled one midnight, unasked. Sulfur, saltpeter, charcoal, proportions and vessel diagrams. The whole black recipe that ended castle walls in my old world's history. I looked at it a long time. Then I closed the page and told Seraphy to bury the entry permanently, and she did something she had never done with any purchase I declined. She said thank you. Some doors stay shut. This world will get there without me, someday, or better yet it won't. But it will not learn fire arithmetic from a man who came here to write things down. What I bought instead was a printing press. The diagrams cost less than a good horse. Grum built the frame in 9 days while insulting Gutenberg's descendants by proxy, and the type took 3 apprentices a month of squinting. And then Ashvale started talking in multiples. The muster charter, printed in 500. The defense doctrine, the boil water rules, the ration rights, printed, posted, pressed into every hand at every gate. Collie took to the press like a hawk to a thermal, and began publishing a single printed sheet, weekly, called the Ashvale Ledger, plain news plainly written, prices, musters, laws, and 1 dry joke. And I watched 60,000 frightened people steady themselves on the simple magic of being told the truth on schedule. Malric ruled by rumor and terror. We went to war with a newspaper. The press itself deserves its comedy recorded, because we needed the laughing that month. Grum regarded movable type as a personal insult, letters too small for honest hands, and built himself bronze tweezers the size of tongs, and used them, delicately daily, while insulting the alphabet. The first ledger came off the frame with the masthead reading ASHVALE LEDGRE, which the city found so delightful that when we corrected it the following week there were complaints, and Collie, who understands power, brings the error back once a year now as a festival joke. And the type case spills became a currency among the district children, who were paid a copper a letter for returns and promptly organized, because they are Ashvale children, into competing salvage guilds with posted rates. Camel audits them. They are, she reports, terrifyingly solvent. I did, for the record, try the obvious exploit. 500 printed contracts, I reasoned, 500 signatures, one glorious mass chime. Seraphy let me get the whole scheme onto the desk before she folded it, gently the way she folds everything. A printed page carries the terms, she said, but the blessing binds at the meeting of souls and ink. The press multiplies paper, not promises. Every signature must still be witnessed, person by person, hand by hand. The blessing does not scale, my lord, she said, and then with the smallest possible smile in her voice, that is rather the point of it. So we witnessed. Iska trained 40 contract readers, and the gate tables ran from bell to bell, hand by hand by hand. The tally in my eye climbed past numbers I could feel. It turns out the blessing scales fine. You just have to do it the honest way, which, Seraphy would like recorded, was always the design. Dr. Ellis arrived with the last free caravans, unasked, carrying the Crown's medical warrant and a wagon of supplies, and I could have kissed him. The young physician who came to my boiling house without his mask had spent 2 years spreading the doctrine through the capital's colleges, and he requisitioned my new hospital hall like a general taking a beach. Boiled linen by the mile, wound protocols drilled into 40 stitchers, salt sugar syrup vatted like soup. You taught me the arithmetic, he said, rolling his sleeves. Now let's see it under artillery. I have collected many strange debts in 2 lives. The ones that walk back through your gate uphill are the best of them. Lori militarized the food that summer, and I mean that with awe. The great kitchen became a commissary running triple hearths, with a printed ration architecture she and Camel built like engineers. Hot lines to the walls at fixed bells, cold stores rotated by date, a soup so dense with beans and barley that Ellis certified it as medicine and the militia named it, affectionately, mortar. She trained 40 cooks and lost not 1 hour of service through everything that came, and when I once suggested, gently, that she might sleep, she pointed a ladle at me with the old courtroom authority and informed me that armies march on their stomachs and hers would arrive fed, and I withdrew from the field. Iska matched her. The soapworks ran wash houses at every district well, because Ellis's arithmetic says clean hands outscore swords, and this city, whatever else it believes its own arithmetic. Voss came with the first dry roads of autumn. We heard him before we saw him, a sound like weather, and then the horizon grew teeth. 8,000 men in column order, siege train behind, engineers already peeling off to survey our approaches, everything unhurried and professional and wrong for the frontier, like a warship in a duck pond. He made camp at 2 miles with textbook precision, dug in against sortie, and sent a single rider under a white branch with a courtesy note requesting the customary parley. My father read the note twice and said the worst sentence I heard that year. This one knows his work. We met in a tent between the lines, and Voss was nothing I wanted him to be. No cruelty, no velvet. An iron-gray man of 60 in a campaign coat worn soft at the elbows, with the eyes of someone who has buried more soldiers than he has promoted. He declined wine. He laid out his commission with the flat regret of a surgeon describing a necessary cut. Surrender the woman, open the gates, and his orders permitted generous terms. Refuse, and he would reduce the city, which, he added, looking at our walls with a professional's honesty, would cost him dearly and take all winter, and he would do it anyway, because those were the orders and he was a soldier. I asked him what he thought of the orders. He was quiet for exactly 1 breath. I think kings should be made to dig graves, he said. Shall we begin, Margrave? I wasn't a Margrave then. I've wondered since whether he knew something or just read men the way I read clauses. The siege of Ashvale began on the 9th of autumn with a politeness that did not survive the week. His engineers found our approaches mined with flooded ditches and our killing ground bare of cover for 800 yards, because my father had spent a year making it so. His first assault came at the north gate behind mantlets, testing, and Sam's crossbow ranks worked the drumbeat they drilled for 2 years. Loose, duck, crank, and the assault learned the arithmetic and went home. His trebuchets answered for a month. Pale concrete drank the hits and spalled and held. We slept to the rhythm of it, stone weather, and Laurie's kitchen sent soup to the walls on a schedule the bombardment never once interrupted, which the wall crews came to treat as a competing artillery and morale won. Siege life found its rhythms, because 60,000 people cannot be terrified on schedule. The schedule wins. The ledger doubled to twice weekly, and shelter wardens read it aloud by lamplight to circles of families, prices and musters, and the one dry joke. And I have been told by many people since that the joke mattered most. District children invented a chalk game called Voss Goes Home, the rules of which changed weekly, and the ending of which never did. Sam walked the night walls like a landlord, and I walked them with him some nights, and we watched the enemy's cook fires make their own city on the plain, and he taught me patiently how to tell a bombardment night from a quiet one by the way the birds sat. My old bully, reading birds for me. 2 lives, and I still don't know what to do with how things turn out. He was good, and it cost us. I will not pretend otherwise. This part of the account is owed to people who cannot read it. A tower forward of the west outwork fell in the 5th week with 9 militia in it. Fire arrows found a granary annex despite everything, and we lost a tenth of the reserve in one orange night. The winter came in on Voss's side, hard and early, and sickness walked the crowded lanes until Ellis's protocols caught it by the collar. 60,000 people learned what a war economy eats. Camel rationed by printed right, not by favor, and the ledger published the arithmetic weekly, and the city, hungry, grieving, held, because it could check the numbers and the numbers were fair. The orange night deserves its own accounting, because the city earned it. Fire arrows found the granary annex roof in a hard wind, and for an hour the flames had the advantage, and then Ashvale did the thing it drills. Bucket chains formed on 3 streets inside 4 minutes, Marin's whistle cutting the dark like a conductor's stick. Iska brought the soapworks crews at a run with their long wash hoses and their pump barrows, because a works that moves water all day owns the tools that move water, and they broke the fires back at the second firewall while the granary teams hauled sacks in relays out the cold side. We lost a tenth of the reserve. The morning after, Camel published the new ration arithmetic unflinched. The wardens read it calmly, and rebuilding started at noon. Grief in this city gets 1 night. Then it gets a work roster, because that is the kinder thing. And every day of it the paper war ran alongside the stone one. This was Kali's front and mine. Every prisoner from every failed assault went back to Voss's lines fed, treated by Ellis's people and carrying a printed sheet. The open charter in Veyron with his own namespace blank at the bottom. Citizenship, wages, land right, amnesty, sworn under a blessing their own camp rumors were already embroidering. Voss's counter-propaganda called it peasant ink magic, which was, as Kali observed with deep satisfaction, free advertising. By deep winter his pickets were shooting fewer of our leaflet arrows down, and his provosts were burning confiscated charters in camp publicly, which is the single stupidest thing you can do with a piece of paper. A cold, unpaid man has been told is a trick. Unpaid. That was the clause under Voss's whole army, and Camel found it, because of course she did. Vera's war chest was a rumor wearing a crown. Malric had bled his treasury white on spies and purges, and the ledgers her clerk network glimpsed through 3 borders said the pay wagons were 4 months behind and lying about it. An army is a contract, the oldest one there is. Wages for blood. And somewhere west of everything, a frightened king was breaking it in bulk, every week 8,000 times, while our leaflets offered the frontiers posted rates. I remember the night she showed me the figures. I looked at them a long time, and then I asked Seraphy quietly whether broken contracts had a weight of their own on the other side of the ledger. "Oh, my lord," she said, soft as snowfall. "You have no idea." The first crosser came before the breach, and I keep his story where I keep Iska's bowl. A picket of 19, a mason's son from a Veyron River town, walked to our gate table through knee snow on a moonless third watch with a leaflet folded to velvet from handling, and stood in the torchlight while Iska read him every clause twice at his asking. When she reached the leaving clause, owing nothing, he stopped her and asked if that was truly written, and she turned the page around and put his finger on the line. He signed with a number for a name because he couldn't write it yet, and the widow who runs our school has since fixed that, and the ink came up blue, and he stood looking at his own mark like a man watching a door he'd been told was painted on swing open. He asked for work in the mason's yards. He was pouring wall concrete by week's end, against his own army. Nobody made him. That is the whole war told once small. The breach came on the longest night of winter. A mine under the north outwork, weeks of Voss's patient engineering, we'd heard scratching and countermine twice but not thrice, and a stretch of pale wall shrugged and sat down into the ditch, and 8,000 men's worth of horns sounded in the dark. What I remember is not the horns. It is Dane at the gap by torchlight, filling it with his own line while masons dragged barricade stone behind him. The oldest soldier I know standing in falling snow at the place where the city was open, doing his job. They came 3 times before dawn. The line held 3 times. On the third, a pike took my captain under the shoulder plate and he went down in the churn, and Sam carried him out on his back, weeping and swearing in one breath, and the barricade closed and the horns at last went home. Ellis fought for Dane for 2 days, and the whole city fought with him the only way it could, which was soup at the hospital door and silence in the lanes, and 60,000 people being very careful with their hope. My father stood watch at the bedside like a man guarding a border, and I sat in my study through the second midnight with the muster maps and the ration ledgers, and for the first time since a golden nowhere, came all the way to the end of myself. This is the part where I tell you the truth. I'm a coward. I have been one in 2 worlds. I hid from my first life behind a locked door, and I had spent this one hiding behind braver people, behind Dane's shield and Sam's ranks in my father's ground, waging war by leaflet from the safest room in the city while other men filled breaches with their bodies. The red-eyed lord of luck, out of ink at last. Seraph's box glowed quietly through all of it and offered me nothing, because there is nothing in any shop for what I lacked. At dawn I went to the breach myself. Not with a sword, I would only have dropped it. I walked up the barricade stone in the gray light with a single printed charter in my hand, unarmed in the black and red every man in both armies knows by now, and I stood in the gap where my captain's blood was still in the snow, in easy bowshot of 8,000 men, and I held the paper up over my head. And I spoke to them, loud as a square day, steady as I could counterfeit. I told them what was written on it. I told them the frontier's rates, posted, and their own king's arrears counted. I told them the door I had walked out of stays open from the inside always for any man who signs, this morning, this winter, or at the end of the world. And then I stood there in the longest silence of my 2 lives, close enough to see the nearest picket's breath, holding up a piece of paper against an army. No one shot me. You know that, or this account would not exist, but I want it recorded that I did not know it standing there. What happened instead was small at first, the way the worst and best things are. A picket grounded his spear. Somewhere back in the lines, a sergeant, 4 months unpaid, whose brother had gone back to camp fed and stitched by our doctors, said something to his file that the provosts did not hear in time. By that night, 11 men had come across the snow to the gate tables with folded leaflets in their gloves. By week's end it was 200, and Voss hanged 2 provosts for extortion trying to stop the bleed, which told his army everything about whose contract was already broken. Iska's readers worked the gate tables in shifts, hand by hand by hand. The chimes ran together like festival bells. The gate tables in those last weeks were something no siege manual describes. Braziers and lamplight at the wall's small postern, Iska's readers working in shifts with a Varan-speaking defector beside each one, reading every clause slow and doubled while frozen men stood dripping and disbelieving. Laurie's kitchen fed each crosser before any questions, always. The old law scaled to an army, and Ellis's stitchers took the frostbite cases first. Some men crossed alone. Then they crossed by files, sergeants bringing their whole commands with the leaflets folded in their gloves, and one iron night a supply company came over with its wagons, teamsters and all, and parked Vera's biscuit inside our walls in neat military order and asked where to sign. The tally in the corner of my eye stopped being a number and became weather, and every chime was a man deciding in the cold to believe a piece of paper. I have never been prouder of anything than I was of that cue. Voss sortied once more because he was a soldier and thoroughness was owed. It broke on the barricades in an afternoon. His heart had counted the outcome before his horn sounded. And then, on a still white morning, the drums beat parley, and the iron-gray man came to the tent between the lines with his campaign coat brushed and his eyes like a closed campaign. He had done the arithmetic, he said, without preamble, the way he did everything. His effectives were under 6,000 and falling by 50 a night, to my gate tables, not my walls. His pay was fiction. His supply line ran through a winter the frontier owned. He could spend what remained of his army breaking one more wall of a city that would feed his own deserters back to him, fatter than his commissary could, in service of an order given by a man both of us should be honest enough to name a murderer on a stolen chair. "I have terms to propose," said General Voss. "Dig out your ink, Margrave, the good kind." We wrote the Salt Ford Accords in that tent in 3 sittings, and I will put my name to this. It was the finest paper I ever drafted, and the other party made it so. Withdrawal of all Veran forces under safe conduct, wounded to Ellis's hospital first. Every deserter and every defector amnestied by name, their citizenship witnessed, their back wages assumed as Ashvale debt and paid from Jarrick's old reparations fund, which Camel noted was the single most satisfying ledger entry of her career. And for Voss himself, nothing. He refused every clause with his name in it signed as guarantor for his men, formally reported his army combatant effective to his own crown, and resigned his commission on the same page in front of me with the pen I lent him. "I told you kings should be made to dig graves," he said, standing older and lighter. "Mine will have to manage without me." He went east, not west, when he rode away. Remember him. Men like that come back into stories. The siege of Ashvale ended without a surrender, because no one surrendered. It ended the way a bad contract ends, unenforceable, abandoned by its parties. The camps came apart over a week, and nearly 3,000 Varans came through our gates by the tables, hand by hand, name by name, gaunt men signing with cold stiff fingers while Iska's readers read every clause and the ink shimmered blue past midnight after midnight. 60,000 and rising. The walls emptied of soldiers and filled with people looking at the horizon just to see it empty. Dane stood on the mended barricade on his own feet, arm bound to his chest, supervising the masons with his one good hand and complaining, which Ellis certified as a full recovery. And Sam wept again publicly and denied it publicly, and the Ledger, which is a responsible publication, printed both facts. Rebuilding began before the last enemy tents were struck. Masons swarmed the breach, and the new stretch of wall went up with a course of dark stone banded through the pale, deliberately, so the scar would show forever my father's idea, a soldier's idea, walls should remember. The 9 militia from the West Tower and all our dead got their names cut into the gate arch where every arrival passes under them, and printed in a black-bordered ledger that the city kept. You still see that issue framed in houses. Dane insisted on attending the arch-cutting upright, argued with Ellis about it, lost, and attended in a chair, which the Ledger reported with what I consider excessive accuracy. Sam drilled the new mixed companies within view of the graves on purpose. "They should know who's watching," he said. "My bully grew up somewhere in that winter, and I never caught the exact day." King Aldous came himself in the first thaw, with a modest column and an immodest document. In the square, before the assembled city, the well, and the contract table under its eave, he read out the Crown's letters patent. For the defense of the realm's frontier, for the breaking of an invading army, and he looked up from the parchment here directly at me with those weary fair eyes, services to the Crown's understanding of what a lord owes the people behind his walls. Ashvale and its compact lands were raised to a margravate, and I, against every reasonable expectation of my childhood physicians, was made margrave of the eastern frontier. The square did not roar this time. It did something better. It sang. I don't remember which song. I remember Marin's voice in it and my father's hand on my shoulder, heavy as a knighthood. And Verena, through all of it, stopped hiding the way spring stops being winter, not on any single day, but visibly, week by week. She had worked Ellis's hospital through the whole siege with her sleeves rolled and her name growing louder around her, and the city that had bled rather than hand her over now nodded to her in the lanes, and she had learned to nod back. The last of the false name came off like a splint. She stood beside Collie at the printing press correcting the Varen language editions with a duchess's grammar. She taught the defectors' children a Western card game in the hospital yard, laughing, hood down, in daylight, 6 years of ditches over. Watching her, I understood the longer road at last, or thought I did. The kidnapping had failed into a siege. The siege had failed into 3,000 witnesses, and the truth of her was now the best documented secret on the frontier, notarized by an entire war. The household absorbed her before I ever signed anything, which is how this family works. The paperwork trails the truth. The weekly card game became institutional, 3 players now, and my wives taught her their private market walk, and I would see the 3 of them moving through the stalls in formation, ledger, ladle, and lately a duchess, arguing about onions. And one evening I found her with my father in the hall, the locket open on the table between them, Rommel telling her about Paris, the way he'd once told me, and Verena listening with her whole stillness, and then quietly telling him about her own father, the murdered duke, the first time I ever heard her speak of him unforced. 2 orphan nobilities trading their dead by hearthlight. Collie stood beside me in the doorway watching them and said, softly, "There's your answer if you were still asking." I hadn't been, but it was good to have it notarized. She came to my study on the first warm evening and she brought her own parchment, which in my household has become the traditional declaration of serious intent. She put it on the desk between us. A contract drafted in her own beautiful undisguised hand, and at the head of it, for the first time on any paper in 6 years, her true name, whole, unabridged, with every title her father's murder had tried to burn. The terms were 3 lines. I will stop running. You will stop pretending you haven't been waiting, signed before the whole city or not at all. You told me once your paper doesn't need my name, she said, chin high, eyes level, entirely unarmored. I need it. Ink me in, Margrave. There are moments the lawyer in you dies. There are others when he stands up and bows. We married in the square because the hall could not have held the third of the city that came. Under the open sky, at the contract table under its eave, with the well boards freshly chalked and the mended wall standing witness over her shoulder. She wore violet to match her impossible eyes, and her hair down dark red over a dress the seamstresses of 5 districts had conspired on, and she signed her whole name slow, letter by letter, like a woman taking something back, and the ink came up blue as deep water. My father stood straight. Camel and Laurie flanked her like a formation the whole day, first wife and second, and I am told the 3 of them had settled the entire architecture of the household a week prior over cards and amber, and that I was informed on a need-to-know basis, and that I did not need to know. The chime, when it came that night, was very soft. Ding. And below it from Seraphy, a line I had never seen the system print before. The ledger notes with satisfaction, debt paid in full the long way. The wedding feast filled 4 squares and lasted until the bells lost count. Laurie catered from inside her formal dress again, tradition now, with her commissary veterans running service like a parade. The defectors' quarter brought Varen wedding dances and taught them to the frontier, and the frontier retaliated with its own, and somewhere past midnight I witnessed Wick, the flintiest man alive, being spun through a Rivertown circle dance by the widow schoolteacher with an expression of grim, methodical joy. Dane gave the toast one-armed, 4 sentences, each one worth a book, and my father danced with each of my wives in turn, formally, gravely, glowing, and then with Marin not formally at all, to the delight of the entire city, and the Ledger's next issue exercised, for the first time in its run, editorial discretion. Spring opened over a margravate. 60,000 people, 3 walls, 2 languages in the market now, and the ledger printing a column in both. The defectors' first crops went into compact fields under compact law, and Pell, who once wept on a grain sack, ran a granary system with a staff of 40 and opinions about all of them. The press ran daily. The bank of ideas in the shop's fifth tier had begun whispering about credit notes, and I was pretending not to listen yet. My whole strange, sprawling family ate at the long tables on the first warm night. Wives and father and captain, commander and cook, headwoman and forewoman and one retired angel of a doctor. And the city noise rolled up the hill, and I sat with my cup and did my private accounting. Not alone. 60,000 strong, 3 rings married onto one ledger line, and not alone by a margin no court could contest. Which is, of course, exactly when the horizon caught fire. Past midnight, the mended north wall, my favorite sentry walk since the masons signed it off. I saw the first light and took it for a farm accident. Then the second. Then the fifth, the ninth, the whole western rim of the world pricking a light, point by point, deliberate as a lamplighter's round, signal fires in a code our watch books did not hold, burning on every barren height from horizon to horizon. The bells began behind me, tower by tower, steady, the deep pattern, and 60,000 people woke and did not panic because we drill. I stood counting fires and stopped at 40. The herald came at dawn, alone under a white branch to the gate my captain holds. Black and silver, a face like a closed ledger, the same man who had carried the ultimatum a year and a lifetime ago. He did not read aloud this time. He handed up a single document, bowed with terrible correctness, and rode west without a word. Dane brought it to the hall himself, one-armed, and set it on the long oak table in front of the whole silent family, the way he had once set down a brand, and it lay there gleaming, ribboned in black, sealed with the arms of Vera pressed deep in blood-colored wax. A declaration of war. Formal, entire, magnificently drafted, the kingdom of Vera against the margravate of Ashvale, Malric's own signature savage at the bottom, ink pressed so hard it had torn the surface. And I noticed something else before fear, before fury, because 2 lifetimes of instinct do not care about timing. The document was printed. Clean, even type on fine white stock, watermarked, when I held it to the candle flame with my own press mark. He had bought our paper through 9 cutouts just to say so. The king of Vera had declared war on me, and he had gone out of his way to do it on my own paper. My family watched me read it. Verena's hand found mine on the table, and underneath everything I was supposed to be feeling, the lawyer in me, incorrigible, was already thinking. He opened the correspondence. Now I get to reply. A soft chime rang above the table, and the box that unfolded was blue and calm, and Seraphi's voice had something in it I had never heard there before. Not gentleness, anticipation. "Final quest available, my lord," she said. "Shall I open the file?" "The contract lord will return."